Today, this is March the 27th, 2018. It's about 6:20 p.m. in the evening. I am Sharon Johnson, and today we are interviewing Gladys Terrell, who is in Nashville, who resides in Nashville. And she was here in Riverside a little bit back in the day, so we're going to interview her to get her impressions of what it was like during that period of time to be at Riverside, the hospital and the church. So, to begin with, would you please state your name and spell it for us?
All right. Let me say, first of all, that this is an honor and a pleasure, and I hope this will help someone else to get closer to the Lord. My name is Gladys Lovette Terrell. The Lovette is my maiden name. Terrell is the last name for, well, my last married name. And I've been married before, but I'll tell you about that later on.
Okay.
Lovette is Lovettee, and Terrell is Terrell. Some people say Terrell or Terrell. I said Terrell, so that's what I've been going by.
So, Terrell it is. Okay. So, where were you born and raised?
Well, I was born in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I was raised in Cincinnati, Ohio. And what happens to you in your childhood, you carries over into your adult life. And I just like to say that Cincinnati at that time was a horrible place to be because the water was so terrible that I didn't drink water. I never did learn how to drink water. And it was the cause of a lot of my problems, health issues that I had later. But I was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I grew up there until I finished high school and went from there to Bennett College for 1 year. I wanted to have a year of fun. I'd never been to the South, and that was really a shock. But it was a good experience, and from there I went on to nursing school. I went to nursing school at Mercy Douglas Hospital in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, because at that time they were not accepting people like me in the hospitals and in the schools where I grew up. So I had to go away to school, and it was a good experience. Well, I joined Riverside in 1966. That was a long time ago, wasn't it? When my youngest was about a year old. And I had 5 girls by then. And people said, no boys? I said no, because the Lord knew I couldn't handle no boys. So anyway, I had 5 girls. And he knew what he was doing because boys are raised different from girls. And so I had me and my 5 girls. We came down from Cleveland, Ohio to Riverside because I heard that the Seventh-day Adventists had a hospital and I wanted to work there. So I called them and found out where they were and just picked up my little family and came on down here. So that was an experience also because I wanted to work in one area and they put me in another. They put me on the night shift in the night shift in the medical surgical part. So I guess they figured that's where they needed me, but I'm not a good night worker. I am not a good night worker. I have to sleep at nighttime. I found that out when I was working. I couldn't stay awake. So I told them I have to change. And so they put me on the day shift.
Do you remember who the administrator was when you came to Riverside Sanitarium? Was it called Sanitarium then?
Do they call it a sanitarium?
Was Riverside a sanitarium? Was it called Riverside Hospital? Because
No, it was a sanitarium, I think, at that time.
okay,
Yes, it was a sanitarium. And it didn't become a hospital until Elder Norman,
Simons.
Norman Simons, made it a hospital. I think so now. Don't quote me on that because sometimes I can't remember things too well. But I do remember it was a sanitarium. And it was nice being a sanitarium because you really worked with people with God's direction. And this was something new to me because I'd always worked in the hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
And to find out about the 8 laws of health and hydrotherapy and all the different things that they did there was really an experience. So I enjoyed that too. I like to learn. I'm glad I do because I found out as the days go by, I know so little. Everything seems like new. Every experience was a new experience. Well, when I became a Seventh-day Adventist, I I picked up a book when I was doing my cleaning at the house and the apartment, and I read about uh, Adventists were the only Protestant denomination because they kept all of God's laws. I said, really? Because I had a lot of questions about why people went to church on Sunday. What difference does it make? Why did God require this, that, and the other? And when I found out that the Seventh-day Adventist was the only Protestant denomination because they kept all of God's laws, I said, I have to go and find these people and see what's so different about them. And when my relatives found out that I wanted to go to the Seventh-day Adventist church, I didn't want to go to the church they went to because they dressed up in white and they took their fried chicken and their bags and their food and went and stayed all day. I said, why are they doing this? I just had so many questions. So when they found out that I wanted to go to the Adventist church, they got in touch with one of the members. They came over and picked me up and took me to church. That's when I only had one child.
Mm-hmm.
So I joined that very day. They answered all my questions about who God was and all the rest, and they just helped me to understand. But one thing I was not taught was how to love God, who God is.
Mm.
I was just taught the basics of the things that you do and the things you don't. And so this is what I did. They said, you need to send your children to church school. I says, okay, where's the church school? And I put my children in church school. I was one of those persons you say, do this, and I did it because I trusted people. Well, I found out by trusting people too much, you get yourself in trouble. And I did later on. But anyway, but that's how I became a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I went to the library and looked up all the different denominations, and they said in the library book that the Seventh-day Adventists were the only Protestant denomination. I said they were the only ones who kept all of God's laws. I said, oh, that's interesting. So I had to go and investigate. When I found out that they were talking about prophecy and that Jesus was coming back and that these were the things we were supposed to do. So I started doing them. Yes, hospital or sanitarium. I think it was a sanitarium at that time.
Okay.
And so that's what I did.
So did you join the church that was attached to the sanitarium when you came?
Yes, the church was right there. That was the old building. The church was, well, you went up some stairs. They had big, a long, uh, well, there were a lot of stairs in the front of it, but there was, you could go in the side door and just go up a few stairs. And that's where people usually went up because there was a lot of stairs, and if there weren't no rails, I mean, there were wide stairs, and if you lost your balance, you'd be tumbling down the stairs. But anyway, we went up the sideway, and it was interesting because there was always something going on, and I was just taking it all in because it was all new to me. I didn't have any offices. I ended up by getting married by there to Charles Terrell and Elder, oh dear, I know his name, Lester. Elder Lester was the one who married us.
Was he pastor at Riverside?
He was the pastor. Elder Lester was the pastor at Riverside at that time. So,
what year was that?
I think it was it was 66 when we came down there, 67. 1970 somewhere. That's a shame. I should know.
You got married,
But anyway,
so
he was the pastor.
Do you remember any of the officers of the church when you came?
Not many, because I wasn't aware of all the offices that were there. I remember, now here again I go with names. Who was the pianist at that time? Sister. Oh, her children. She had a daughter who played the piano too. Well, anyway, I might think of it later on.
Okay. So, what was Riverside like when you first came? What were your first impressions?
You mean the hospital or the church?
Yes, the hospital and the church. Tell me first about the hospital, then tell me about the church.
Well, I came down there to work at the hospital because I wanted to be of service. So I started working at night, and then they transferred me to the day. And it was different because I'd worked in different parts of the hospital before I came down here, and the work was easy. The only thing I didn't like about it, I couldn't spend time with the patients. We were always busy, even doing doctor's orders or translating them to the charts and ordering medication and doing a lot of paperwork. So I didn't like the paperwork. I wanted to talk with the patients and never had a chance to do that because we were so busy following doctor's orders. At that time, if a doctor came up to the desk, you stood up to talk to the doctor. You didn't remain seated and just look up and talk to him. No, you stood up, and the doctors were the ones who gave out all the orders.
Who were some of the doctors that you remember who were there when you were there?
Oh, Dr. Dent. Dr. Dent was there. He was the director over all the doctors. Dr. Dixon was there. Dr. Johnson, who was not an Adventist, was one of the doctors who took over after Dr. Dent. So those are the three that I remember. And it was nice in that they were very nice, but you had to look up to the doctors. You weren't on an equal with them.
I guess that was that period of time.
It was that period of time. And all hospitals were like that. So I didn't think it was anything unusual.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I had left and had gone to other places, I found out the doctors were sometimes not as professional as they should be. But people are people. We're all human. We all make mistakes, and we can change. So it was just the time when the doctors were in charge. You didn't, if you disagreed with them, you didn't say anything. If you didn't think that was the right medication, you kept your mouth closed.
Mm-hmm.
If you worked in the operating room, and oh, I know another doctor, Dr. Brown, and she always said, whatever happens behind these doors stays behind these doors. So those are things that sort of stuck in my mind at that time. I said, whatever happens stays behind the doors. What are they talking about? What's going on back there? Made me wonder, why is it that they were being so secretive? But anyway, that's just the way things were at that particular time. I worked in the nursing and the delivery room at one time. We were so small that you did lots of different things. You wore a lot of hats. So when I worked in the labor and delivery area, that was interesting because you watched the patients while they were in labor. And then you called the doctor when you thought the lady was ready to deliver. And I remember one doctor says, don't call me until such and such. I said, oh, I have to watch them a little bit more carefully. Anyway, it was an education. It was an education in how to deal with different people. And there are no two people alike.
Were there any more female physicians? I mean, you mentioned one, Dr. Brown.
Dr. Brown.
Were there other female physicians there?
Yes, there was another one. She was the OB-GYN physician. I can't think of her name right now. But there were others.
So what was the Riverside, what was it like physically? Was there a campus there? Did you live next to the hospital? What was that like?
Well, when I first went down there, we lived in a house, and while they built the new hospital, so the old hospital was just an old building where everything went on. But they built the new one after I got there. I can't remember the date, but I remember the date was on one of the buildings. But we lived on a campus in a house, and we could walk to work, to the hospital. And it was like a family. Everybody seemed to help everyone else. You didn't have to lock your doors. It's not like it is now. But it was like a family, and everyone sort of helped each other. I was trying to think of the name of the nursing director. Her husband was the Pathfinder leader. And since my children were sort of at the age, my youngest one, they were at the age where they could join the Pathfinders.
Mm-hmm.
I joined it too, because I thought they were having so much fun. I wanted to experience the things that they were experiencing because I never had this in my childhood when I was growing up. So it was like a family, and I went with them on their trips, and I enjoyed it as though I was one of the children. So I might have acted like one of them too. But everything to me was new, and I just enjoyed whatever I was doing. I don't know if that's...
So, what was your first impression when you got there? What was your first reaction when you saw Riverside Church and Riverside Sanitarium?
I said, this is God's church, this is God's place, and I want to learn and be of value here. So I just did whatever they told me to do. So it to me, it was like, okay, this is where I'm supposed to be. It was like coming home.
Mm.
And whatever went on, you dealt with it. I wasn't the very best nurse, I'll tell you. I wasn't very stable either because I had so many problems that kept me from, I was under stress all the time. So the work was nice in that I could do whatever they wanted me to do.
So, can you describe any significant events that you experienced at Riverside, either the church or the hospital? Start out with the hospital, since that's what you came down for. Any significant events at Riverside Hospital?
It wasn't a nice event. At one time, I was working in the department where you were teaching. I was the person who was going to be teaching the students for the LPN class.
So there was a school at Riverside?
There was a school for LPNs, licensed practical nurses. Mm-hmm. And they had the very best one there because when they finished, they could work anywhere. And they had a good reputation for making good nurses. Mm-hmm. So Riverside Hospital or Riverside Sanitarium was highly respected. People came there from all over the world to come there and experience the good food, the physical therapy, the hydrotherapy, and the peace and the quietness of having doctors who prayed with their patients. Mm. And that impressed me a lot too, because I'd never experienced that before. A doctor praying for a patient? That was unusual for me, because it hadn't been in my experience when I was working every place else. It just seemed as though the doctors were always hollering at the nurses and telling them, do this and do that. What's wrong with you? I'd experienced all of that too. But the atmosphere of Riverside was peace and quiet. And for Sabbath, on Friday night, they had the young people going around taking a flower to each of the patients and offering to pray for them. Everything that they did there was bringing people back to the Lord. And so nature was a part of it. And they only had very few people worked on the Sabbath, just those who had to be there to take care of the patients. Everybody else went to church, which was right next door to the hospital. So it was an unusual experience, and I've always thought, oh, I wish it could have continued. I wish it could have continued, because it was so different. Mm-hmm. And people loved to come there because God was there. And I think when we went away from the blueprint and started trying to be like everybody else, that's when we went downhill.
So was the hospital generally full? What was the patient population?
Let's see. That,
What was the bed count there? Do you remember?
I think they could take 50. I think their maximum was 50 people. That's upstairs and downstairs. And there sometimes it was full and sometimes it was not. It depends.
Mm-hmm. So, are you still a member of Riverside?
No, I'm not, because I moved away. I moved from Nashville down to Murfreesboro and went to church down there because they made Charles Terrell the acting pastor in between. Because Dr. Coopwood started the church in Murfreesboro.
Was he a physician at Riverside?
Yes, he was a psychiatrist there.
There were
at Riverside and at, if I remember correctly now, I know he would put some, no, I think he was mostly at Meharry.
Okay.
Mostly at Meharry. We didn't have any psychiatric patients there.
So
that I remember.
Okay. So what significance do you think Riverside has played in Nashville?
It had a reputation for being an excellent place to go to get well. This reputation was all over. And when they had to close Riverside, many people were very unhappy because of closing that whole area. And it was because they made it a hospital instead of a sanitarium. And they had to have the same methods of healing people as all the other hospitals. They had to come up to the standard that the other hospitals had. So when they did that, that meant we could not do the things that God had designed us to do, and therefore it's just like any other work. When we leave God's method and adopt the worldly standard, we always go down. We go downhill. And that's probably one of the reasons now that we're not, well, we're the Laodicean church. Mm-hmm. We're rich, increased with goods, and have need of nothing. And we're satisfied like that. But God is not pleased, and we are not doing his work. So now we're getting back to it. Not only at Riverside, but many other churches are also getting back to the blueprint.
So what are some of the faith lessons that you learned through Riverside? What God has done through the church or for the church?
Faith lessons? Mm-hmm. Number one, you can't mix God's work with worldly work. And you cannot adopt the enemy's method of healing with God's method. God's method and God's method alone is what we need to be doing. We have to teach the people what the 8 laws of health are. And people don't want to learn, they want a quick fix. But there's no quick fix with God's program. You either do exactly as God says, or you're on the enemy's side. Mm-hmm. So that's not only with Riverside, that's with any other work that we're doing. Many people are willing to follow God's method, but we're not living what we're supposed to. It's only as we live and do exactly as God says, not putting any of our own ideas into it. I learned that recently. because I was trying to do something all on my own, thinking I had to do this and had to do that and had to do the other. But that was not God's method. When we read through the Bible that God said, do this and not that, we have to follow him exactly. I'm reading the Bible about Solomon, who was the wisest man ever. And he was wise because he asked for wisdom. And God gave him that and a whole lot of other things. But he became proud and forgot where his source of wealth came from. And it all came from God. And when we realize everything that we have comes from God and it belongs to God, and he has put us in charge of it to use it for his glory and honor, then we'll make progress.
So, what were the major? Is that one of the major changes that you've noticed over the years with it? But actually, there weren't any major changes because you weren't at Riverside, so you didn't notice any major changes.
The only changes I noticed when I was there was that they were trying to have a hospital instead of a sanitarium.
Mm-hmm.
And with the hospital, there's certain things you had to have and had to do.
What about the church? Were you there long enough to notice any changes?
When we moved away and we were in Murfreesboro, I noticed changes. The first time I noticed changes was when I went to camp meeting and the music changed. The changes that came about were so gradual that unless you knew what God's purpose was and what he required of his people, you wouldn't know that there were any changes.
So is this with, you talking about with Riverside, or are you talking about in the church in general?
I'm talking about the church in general.
Okay, because I was wanting to know if you noticed anything with Riverside.
With Riverside?
Yeah, since that's the history that we're covering.
Since I left there and I would come back, I was surprised to see how the music had changed and how the things that were being taught were not as well, it was so subtle. The changes were so tiny that you wouldn't know it unless you were comparing it when you first came in.
Mm-hmm.
So when I first became a member of Riverside Chapel, as it was called, it was more according to what God wanted his people to do. We were really witnessing, going out witnessing. When I became an Adventist, we used to go out and ingather. We don't do that anymore. They said that's begging or some other reason. But when you went out then, you felt as though you were really going to contact people and tell them what we were doing and ask them for a donation.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that was good witnessing, because we always left them a message magazine or some kind of literature. And after a while, people began to expect us to come. So when they stopped that, we lost contact with the community.
Okay. So you think that what kind of impact did Riverside have on the community, the hospital? Did they, economically, did they have an impact there, like in employment or opportunities?
The impact on the community was such that people respected Riverside. Not only respected the church, but respected the hospital or the sanitarium until they changed. When we stop doing what God says do, we're always going to go downhill. We have to look at God as our Heavenly Father and the fact that He knows everything. And if we are going to be in heaven, we'll do all things His way. What impacted me was that the Bible and the Bible only was taught in the beginning. Now we have lots of other things being taught. Other people are coming in preaching who are not really dedicated to doing God's work.
So what would you want people to know about the history of Riverside, if there was just one in the history that you remember?
The history that I remember of Riverside Church and Riverside Hospital or Sanitarium, that they were doing exactly as God said to. They were teaching people how to be healthy. And as a hospital, we don't do that. I believe that might have been one of the reasons it closed. We lost a good way to witness through the health message.
Mm.
And we need to get back to that. This is why so many people are understanding that the 8 laws of health are to be obeyed for healthy people. But we have to spend time with them and get to know the person and not just do something because we're getting some money from it. We're living in the last days of this world's history. Looking at what's going on in the government, looking at the changing of the laws, and that our freedoms are being taken away gradually. If we're not aware of what's going on, we're going to wake up and everything will be gone, and we won't have anything. And we're too satisfied with status quo.
Mm-hmm. So, are there any major issues that we haven't covered about Riverside history or Riverside Sanitarium or Riverside Hospital? Was there something that was not covered that you...
At the time they had the hospital, the major thing was they had a school, they had a store, they had the sanitarium, they had the church, and all of them were following God's plan. The thing that we see now is that everything is just like the world. Our music is just like the world. The preaching is the same. So these are the things that I have noticed in our church and in our hospital. And to me, I guess that's one reason why it closed. We were no longer doing God's work. We were no longer a sanitarium. We were a hospital.
Were you working there when it closed?
No, I had left. I had gone back to school and had taken my course in, I can't remember when it closed. But I know that I was there for the last closing events. I came for it. And it was not a nice thing to see. Too many people who were there had been there for years, and they had noticed the changes also. We were not doing what God said do. And that's been all through history of the Bible. People can start out doing what God says do, but if their minds are distracted, then we find that they will stray away from God's program. And the separation from God's program means that we're not doing His work.
Mm-hmm. So did you want to share a little bit about your personal testimony? You don't have to.
Well, my personal testimony is that I look back and I saw all the many things I did that were wrong. I was doing what I thought was right. But when we compare what we are doing with what God wants us to do, we either come up with the idea that, well, I think He wants me to do this, but I think I'll do it this way. When we look at sin, sin is selfishness. When we call it by its right name, sin is selfishness. It's doing, and we're born that way. This is why I had to recognize the fact who I was. I had to recognize I was doing things my way, getting married to the wrong people, not following God's instructions, and I reaped the benefits of wrong choices. I am now dedicated to the health message. I have had so many experiences of trying to follow professional ways of doing things with the physicians, and I found out that was not God's way. Everything has changed. Doctors no longer treat people because of they want them to get well. I talked with some doctors and they said, I can't make any money doing the 8 laws of health. The idea is make money. Doctors now are, their education is funded by the pharmaceutical houses. So the doctors are caught in a triangle, and they are in the middle. They have to do what the pharmaceutical houses say. This is the way we treat diseases. The lawyers are waiting there to pounce on them if they deviate from what the pharmaceutical houses say. And the insurance people say, we want you to treat the people this way. This is what we will pay for. So it's a money thing. Cancer can be cured, a lot of diseases, but it means that we have to move away from conventional ways of healing. When I found that out, I says, I want to go God's way. And so I've been trying for years to have a place where people can come and get well using the 8 laws of health, teaching them in a way that it's fun. So my whole testimony is follow God's way. He will lead us if we will follow Him. And it means we have to be completely dedicated to doing everything God's way. We have to if we want to use the 8 laws of health, we have to live it ourselves. Mm-hmm. And that's what I've been trying to do. And I found out it works.
Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you and giving us your thoughts and your memories of Riverside Sanatorium and Riverside Chapel.
It's been my pleasure. I hope it's been helpful. And I am happier now than I've ever been by doing what God says to do.